Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a time before showers, deodorant, or even the word hygiene. That's right, you're a medieval peasant now. You live in a drafty little cottage, your mattress is full of straw, and your idea of skincare is not accidentally rubbing your face with nettles. The moment your eyes blink open, you're hit with the sweet scent of damp wool, yesterday's turnip soup, and something that might have once been a rodent under the floorboards. You stretch, yawn, and try not to inhale too deeply, because, well, you stink. Everyone stinks. And that's just how things are. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all tune in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle across the uneven floorboards, barefoot, your toes instantly coated in a film of something. Not quite mud, not quite manure. You lift your tunic to sniff your armpit out of sheer curiosity, and then immediately regret it. But here's the twist. You're not gross. You're just normal. Because in your time, soap is a luxury. Something fancy folks might use, or something monks might boil in the back of a monastery using pig fat and ashes. You've maybe heard of it. Maybe. Water's no good either. Bathing's not forbidden exactly, but it's tricky. The village well is a social hub, sure, but dragging buckets of icy water just to pour over your head feels criminal. Plus, local rivers, cold, muddy, and sometimes upstream from your neighbour's outhouse. Medieval life has a cycle, and getting clean rarely fits into it. Instead, you embrace the art of selective washing. Hands if you're about to knead bread. Face if your crush is around. Feet maybe if it's Sunday. That's about it. You've got a little cloth you dampen to wipe down the important bits, and that's considered a good day. Still, historians debate whether peasants were truly that filthy, or if modern standards just make them seem worse. Some argue that records from the time exaggerate dirtiness to paint the poor in an unflattering light. Others point out how often peasants were fined for not cleaning shared tools or wells, which implies at least a basic awareness of hygiene. But even with your rag wipes and hasty river dips, your body tells its own story. Your skin's tougher, weathered from sun and wind. There's probably a permanent smear of soot on your face from cooking over the hearth. And when winter comes, you'll go weeks without even touching water unless it's melted snow in a bucket. And yet, you survive. You don't drop dead of grime. In fact, your immune system is basically doing CrossFit. Sure, there are diseases, but they usually come from fleas or bad meat, not from forgetting to rinse behind your ears. Your village doesn't bat an eye at your state. Everyone is on the same stench spectrum. Even your local priest, who's supposed to be the moral standard, smells like a mix of incense and goat. If anyone's judging you, they're probably doing it while scratching their own lice bites. You head outside where dawn is breaking over the thatched rooftops. Chickens cluck at your feet. A dog sniffs your leg. No one says a word about your 3-day-old tunic with a suspicious brown patch near the hem. Instead, your neighbour nods and offers you a shared sip of weak ale. Yes, morning ale. Because water isn't always safe to drink, but ale has been boiled. Another daily survival hack. You sip and it tastes like warm bread and yesterday's regrets, but it's better than dysentery. There's a kind of quiet dignity in it all. You learn to live with the earth. Literally. It clings to you. You walk through fields, kneel in gardens, haul compost. Dirt becomes part of your identity. So much so that by springtime, you've got a tan that's actually just soil. And even romance, that shimmering concept modern people tie to scented candles and spa nights, still finds a way. People fall in love in pig pens. They steal glances over ploughshares. They flirt by offering each other garlic cloves and slightly cleaner rags. No one expects perfection, only kindness and strong shoulders. Now don't get too dreamy-eyed. Being dirty isn't glamorous. Your underarms itch, your boots never dry, and someone in the house always has a strange rash. But you learn to live in the grit. Your skin is stronger for it. and maybe your soul is too. Also, random fact, some wealthier peasants actually tried DIY soap. They'd mix ashes with pig fat and water in a wooden tub, stir it for hours, and create a gritty grey sludge that half worked, half burned. If you were lucky, someone in your hamlet knew the trick. If not, you just stuck with vinegar rinses and prayers. Speaking of vinegar, you'd be surprised how many peasants used it for everything. Hair rinse, mouthwash, even deodorant. Historians still argue whether this was effective or just a medieval placebo. But hey, if you've ever dabbed apple cider vinegar under your arms, congrats. You're basically 14th century chic. So here you are, hair matted, fingernails blackened, breath medieval. But you're not alone. This is life, and somehow, despite everything, it still has joy in it. You sing songs while hauling hay. You tell jokes around the hearth. You plan May Day dances with the same people who haven't bathed since Lent. And best of all, no one on earth knows what BO even stands for. You trudge out into the yard, trailing the smell of damp wool and wood smoke, and honestly, no one notices. Because here's the deal, dirt is the default. It's not just on your skin, it's in your pores, under your nails, ground into every hem of your tunic. Your feet are permanently stained a dusty brown, and your elbows feel like old tree bark. That's just what you look like when you survive on barley bread and hard work. Bathing? Hilarious. The closest thing to a bath for you is standing in the rain long enough that the mud washes off your arms. And even then, someone nearby will yell that you're wasting time when there's threshing to be done. But here's the part no one tells you. You're not slacking off. No one else is bathing either. The idea of washing daily, like full body, hot water, maybe even soap, is practically science fiction. The peasants you live among aren't unhygienic by choice. They're surviving on edge of famine rations, scrambling to make it through each season. Soap, water, privacy. Those are bonus features no one ordered. Historians still argue whether peasants actually bathed more than we give them credit for. Some evidence points to riverside washing rituals, especially during festivals. But for the most part, daily grime was like a second skin. You wore it with pride, or at least resignation. Your clothes don't help either. You own one, maybe two tunics. They're thick, woolen and absorbent. So every time you sweat, which is, let's face it, constantly, that wool hangs onto it like a cursed sponge. After a week it smells like mouldy hay and ambition. After two, it's taken on a personality. And because medieval people believed that hot water could open your skin to illness, bathing too often was actually feared. Better to be crusty and alive than squeaky clean and on your deathbed. In fact, cold water was considered closing, and thus safer. But who wants a freezing soak in a wooden barrel while wind howls through a hole in the thatch? Still, there are little tricks you've picked up. In spring, you wash your face with dew off the grass. It's supposed to give you clear skin and maybe keep away evil spirits. In summer, you strip to your underthings and wade waist-deep into the river just to get that I'm not fully rotting feeling. It's not hygiene as modern folks know it. It's just survival. Damp, cold, slightly fishy survival. And let's talk fingernails. They're basically miniature archaeological digs. You plant crops, gather firewood, clean out chicken droppings, and by the end of the day, you've got a terrarium under your nails. No one judges you for it. Your hands are supposed to be brown. If your nails are pink and trimmed, someone's going to assume you're a noble, or worse, a priest. Oh, and shoes. Optional. You might have a pair of hard leather boots stuffed with straw, but honestly, barefoot is easier. You've built up calluses that could slice cheese. When you step in something squishy, you just keep walking. Now brace yourself, because here comes a fringe tidbit. Some folks in your village genuinely believe that staying too clean might make you attractive to demons. Yep, demons, fairies, and assorted invisible mischief makers apparently love the smell of rosemary and warm skin. But if you're covered in ash and cow sweat, they'll pass you by. So really, your natural funk is spiritual armour. Go you. Despite everything, the social order still functions. You can go to church, buy a turnip, get married, all while looking like you've just crawled out of a compost heap. It's democratic in a way. Everyone is equally gross. No one is going to accuse you of not showering, because what is a shower? In fact, the scent of your life, dirt, smoke, body, bread, is deeply personal. People can identify neighbours just by walking past their cottage. If you get a whiff of garlic and fermented goat milk, you know it's old Marjorie. If someone smells like tallow and panic, it's probably your cousin before tax day. And food? That doesn't help. Your diet includes onions, garlic, and whatever dried fish was left over from last week's market. No one's breath is minty, but no one cares. Halitosis just blends in with the natural scentscape. You might get married to someone whose morning breath could fell an ox. But hey, you've got the same thing going on, so it all evens out. And speaking of marriage, you do start to wonder how romance even works in this environment. Everyone smells, everyone's greasy, everyone's got some kind of mystery rash or flea infestation. Yet somehow people still fall in love. They still write songs, carve hearts into tree bark, and sneak kisses behind haystacks. Maybe it's because when everything smells bad, nothing really does. Your brain resets the baseline. You adapt, and you start to notice other things. Someone's laugh, the way they carry water, how they don't complain during ploughing season. That's what counts, not whether their armpits are floral scented. Remember this. Dirt back then didn't mean shame. It meant labour. It meant survival. It meant you'd made it through another season, against every odd. So when you show up to the village festival looking like a half-baked potato, you don't apologise. You just straighten your tunic, scrape the mud off your knees, and hope no one steps on your foot during the dancing. Because even when you're coated in layers of grime, lice and wheat chaff, you're alive, you're part of something, and someone out there thinks you're kind of cute anyway. You grip your tunic at the hem and give it a tug, half expecting it to tear. And somehow, it doesn't. This thing has seen everything. Births, deaths, harvests. One really unfortunate incident with a goose. It's practically a member of the family. You wear it every day, because it's your only tunic, and until it falls apart, you'll keep boiling it, beating it, and hoping the lice don't unionize. Today is laundry day, and before you get any ideas of breezy lines of fresh linen flapping in the wind, let's get real. Laundry in your life is brutal. First, you drag your heavy wooden tub outside, half full of rainwater if you're lucky, and dump in a bucket of boiling water heated over the hearth. Then comes the secret weapon, lye soap, not the fancy perfumed stuff. No, this is a peasant's brew, lye made from wood ash, mixed with animal fat or old kitchen grease. All stirred together until it turns into something thick, caustic and slightly terrifying. You toss in your tunic, your undershift, your one pair of linen brays, yes, medieval underwear had a name, and let them soak. Then it's time for the beetle. Not the insect, but a wooden club used to pummel the clothing into submission. You beat your garments against a washing board or flat stone until the water turns the colour of despair, and you will get splashed. Hot lye water stings your skin. You'll feel it in your eyes, your cuticles, and if you're having a particularly bad day, in your nose. But cleanliness is not gentle, not here. Some peasants add herbs to the mix, lavender if it's growing nearby, or thyme, or even crushed mint. Not because it cleans better, but because it masks the horror. This is your medieval version of scented detergent. Historians still argue whether peasants had access to enough soap for weekly laundry, or just monthly deep cleans. Some even suggest that certain villages shared a community soap stash, stored in clay crocks like the crown jewels of hygiene. Others claim many just use boiling water and elbow grease alone. Either way, laundry day is rare, sacred, and physically exhausting. You do it maybe once every 2 weeks. Maybe. Depends on the weather, the harvest, the health of your goat, and whether the bishop is coming by. Oh, and let's not forget the drying process. There's no clothesline in your yard. Just a few pegs hammered into the side of the cottage, and maybe a low tree branch or two. You hang everything up, hoping it doesn't rain, and pray a dog or wayward toddler doesn't run off with your clean braise. By evening, your tunic is stiffer than a bishop's collar and smells faintly of wood smoke and disappointment. But it's clean, technically, and tomorrow, when you put it on again, you'll feel ever so slightly smug about it. Now here's a weird little tidbit. In some villages there were actual laundry superstitions, like don't wash clothes during certain moon phases, or the spirits of the dead will tangle your thread, or if you accidentally beat your own shadow with the beetle while doing laundry, you'll fall ill. So yes, you're washing clothes, but you're also dodging curses. You glance over at the neighbour's tub. She's beating her husband's shirt with the kind of focus usually reserved for tax collection. Her face is splattered with soap, her arms are strong, and her bucket is steaming like a witch's cauldron. There's something almost noble about it, or at least mildly terrifying. You chat while you scrub. Laundry day is also village gossip day. You hear who's got a new chicken, who's been sneaking around the grain store, and which widow is secretly seeing the shepherd who smells like wet moss. No one smells good, but everyone smells different, and that counts for something. And just when you think you've conquered laundry, you remember the linens, your bedding. Straw mattresses don't get cleaned, they get replaced. But your sheets, if you even have any, need to be rinsed out too. You drag them from the bed, cursing under your breath as clouds of dust, skin flakes and long-dead insect parts rise into the air like a haunted fog. Into the tub they go. More boiling, more beetling. You spot something moving in the folds, probably a spider or a ghost. You ignore it. There's only so much one medieval peasant can care about before collapsing into existential fatigue, and when it's all over, you hang everything up and collapse on a stool, arms sore, knuckles red. The sun is setting, your back aches, and the smell of lye clings to your hair like a warning label. But there's a quiet kind of victory in it. You did something hard. You wrestled your daily filth into something borderline acceptable. You'll sleep tonight on linens that almost smell like nothing. You might even get a wink of admiration tomorrow when someone notices your tunic isn't shiny with grease for once. The truth is, laundry isn't about appearances. It's about comfort, ritual, and occasionally romance. In fact, the act of cleaning your future spouse's tunic was sometimes seen as a gesture of affection. Nothing says I'm into you like willingly touching someone's weak old underthings. So tomorrow, when you head into town or church or the maypole dance, you'll walk a little taller in your boiled, beetled best. And when someone leans in close to whisper gossip or ask for a dance, they might not gag. Progress. You rub your jaw with the back of your hand and wince. There's a dull ache in one molar that's been threatening to ruin your week, and there's not a single toothbrush in sight. In fact, the concept of a toothbrush hasn't even made it to your part of the world yet. Instead, you grab a twig, maybe a hazel stick if you're feeling fancy, and start gnawing at one end until it frays. Congratulations, you've made a medieval chew stick. Tooth care as a peasant is more about survival than sparkle. Your diet doesn't help either. You're chewing tough bread crusts, dried peas, and whatever root vegetables haven't turned to mush. Your teeth do a lot of grinding, and not the good kind. There's no dentist to call, no floss, and definitely no minty mouthwash. Just you, your stick, and a vague hope that chewing enough parsley will make a difference. That ache in your molar. You try not to think about it. If it gets worse, your only option is the local barber surgeon, who's just as likely to cut your hair crooked as he is to yank out the right tooth. He'll offer you a shot of strong ale, wedge a piece of leather between your teeth, and pull with something that looks suspiciously like blacksmith tongs. Historians still argue whether peasants had worse teeth than nobles. On one hand, you don't eat refined sugar, too expensive, so cavities are rarer. On the other, you're grinding grain with millstones that sometimes shed grit into the flour. That means you're basically eating a spoonful of sand with every loaf of bread. Your enamel? Not a fan. There's a reason old peasants often have the sunken cheeks of someone who can't chew anymore. Once your molars go, it's gruel for the rest of your life. Still, you make do. You rinse with vinegar, chew on fennel or sage leaves, and sometimes even rub your gums with ash or salt, pretending it's helping. And let's not forget breath. Medieval breath is vivid. You might think the lack of sugar means your breath smells better, but remember, garlic, onions, pickled fish, and stomachs full of cabbage aren't exactly a recipe for freshness. You can try chewing mint or juniper berries if they're around, but mostly you just speak at a respectful distance and hope for the best. Your tongue feels like it's been coated in wool, but there's no tongue scraper in your wooden chest of personal effects. So you do what everyone else does, you ignore it, or you rub it with your shirt sleeve and keep it moving. Some fringe thinkers, monks mostly, have started writing about health and digestion, claiming that bad teeth are signs of a sinful or gluttonous lifestyle. Which is hilarious, because your lifestyle is mostly turnips and disappointment. Still, you nod along when the priest says it just in case. But here's something curious. If you're getting married, someone might actually check your teeth. Not officially, not with a clipboard, but your betrothed's family might sneak a peek when you laugh. Having a full set of teeth suggests you're healthy, strong, and can chew through a winter's worth of barley. Sexy, right? And if a tooth rots and falls out, you bury it. Not out of sentiment, but superstition. Some folks believe that if you toss it into a fire, your other teeth will fall out in sympathy. Others say if you keep it hidden under your pillow, it'll ward off evil spirits. So yes, the original tooth fairy was actually an exorcism strategy. You squat outside your cottage in the morning, brushing away at your chew stick and spitting into the grass. The taste of bark fills your mouth, and for a brief moment it almost feels clean. You sniff your breath, still medieval, but not quite lethal. There's something comforting about the routine though. You know it won't save your teeth, not really. But it's a gesture of control in a world where everything, from illness to taxes, feels like it's handled by fate or feudal lords. Your teeth are yours, and for now most of them are still in your mouth. And let's be honest, everyone you know has bad teeth. Even the village reeve, who struts around like a noble, talks through a mouth that looks like it lost a fight with a horseshoe. Beauty standards here are flexible. A missing tooth isn't a deal breaker, it's a conversation starter. Plus, you're probably more confident than you should be. You smile often, even laugh hard, and no one clutches their nose. You lean into it. You're not disgusting, you're earthy. Call it confidence, call it resilience, but you've made it work. Quirky side note. Some women in your village use ground animal bones and charcoal to scrub their teeth on special occasions. It's abrasive, leaves black streaks on your gums, and probably shortens your dental career by 5 years. But hey, it gives you that dramatic, smoky mouth look, like a medieval fashion statement. You pass the chew stick to your cousin, who gives it a sniff and hands it back. Hygiene is communal. Boundaries are minimal. If someone's breath is truly unbearable, someone else might slip them a clove or a dried apple skin, a medieval version of handing out gum. And if all else fails, smile and blame the goats. They've been farting near the bread oven again anyway. Despite everything, you survive. You don't have gleaming molars, but you get by. You chew your food slowly, avoid the really hard nuts, and dream of a future where someone somewhere invents toothpaste. Until then, it's twigs, vinegar, and brute force optimism, and honestly, your smile still works. The fire crackles softly as you sit on a worn wooden bench, tucking your knees to your chest while steam curls up from a giant cauldron. Today's a rare day, it's bath day. But not just for you, it's everyone's bath day. Communal bathhouses, believe it or not, are a thing in your world, and as you'll soon find out, they're equal parts cleansing ritual, gossip mill, and social experiment gone mildly sideways. You sling your tunic over a peg, clutch a linen cloth for modesty's sake, or not, depending on how many mugs of ale you've had, and step into the muggy air of the village bathhouse. The room smells of warm water, mildew, and maybe a hint of thyme if someone was feeling generous with the herb bundle. There's a big wooden tub in the middle, wide enough to hold 6 people, and yes, you're about to share it with strangers, some of whom are already in there, some of whom are very naked. You ease yourself into the tub, sighing as the hot water laps at your calves. The temperature varies depending on how early you arrived. First group gets hot water, the rest of you get used water. Historians still argue whether bathhouses were mainly used by peasants, or whether they were more common among urban dwellers and wealthier folk. But out in your rural corner, they crop up now and then, especially in places influenced by Roman ruins, where public bathing left behind traditions and maybe even working aqueducts. Lucky you. Men and women usually bathe separately, though not always. In fact, some bathhouses have a reputation. If the candles are burning a little too low and the ale is flowing a little too freely, things might get steamy in more ways than one. You avoid eye contact, just in case old Walter from the tannery tries to strike up another conversation about heating methods, while conspicuously not covering himself. But for most, the bathhouse is practical. It's a chance to scrub the filth from your skin, soak out the ache in your back, and emerge slightly less pungent than usual. You take a handful of soft soap, if you're lucky enough to have any, and rub it under your arms. It doesn't lather much, but it smells vaguely of rosemary and burnt fat. A nice break from damp wool and despair. You scrape a strigil, a curved bronze blade, down your arms, sloughing off weeks of sweat, soot and soil. It's weirdly satisfying, and maybe just a bit gross. But hey, you're not the only one peeling your epidermis into the water. In the corner, a few younger kids splash each other, earning disapproving looks from a nearby grandmother who's humming a hymn while scrubbing her knees with sand. That's another cleaning method. Abrasive dirt to fight. Ingrained dirt. Medieval logic is beautiful like that. You glance across the tub and see someone shaving. Not their face, their whole head. Lice. Again. Better to go bald than itch your skull raw. You silently consider joining them. Your scalp's been doing a weird tickle itch thing for days. There's also a ritualistic air to the bathhouse. Something almost sacred. Not quite religious, but definitely cultural. People enter heavy with the week's burdens. Dust, animal stench, worry, and leave lighter. Not just cleaner, but calmer. Sometimes the village priest shows up and mumbles a blessing over the steam. Sometimes he pretends not to notice the two teenagers awkwardly holding hands beneath the waterline. Fringe fact incoming. Some medieval bathhouses were built right next to alehouses, or even in them. So yes, you could drink a pint while soaking in the buff. Which sounds cosy until you realise someone always spills their mug into the water. You reach for a handful of herbs someone tossed in. Chamomile, maybe marjoram, floating like leafy confetti. You rub it into your hair, pretending it'll help. It won't. Your hair will still dry into its natural haystack that lost a fight shape, but it smells better than the usual barnyard blend. Of course, not everyone's on board with bathing. Some folks think it makes you weak, opens your pores to evil spirits or humours. A few even believe frequent washing is vain, even sinful. The Lord doesn't care how you smell, someone once grunted at you in church. You weren't convinced he was entirely correct, or entirely sober. Still here you are, soaking, scraping, sneaking glances at other people's toes and wondering how they're so clean. You chat idly about the harvest, about rumours from the next village over, about who might be getting married next spring. The bathhouse is a hub, not just of hygiene, but of information. Eventually your fingers wrinkle like prunes and the water cools. Someone pours a fresh bucket in, sending up a brief cloud of warm steam. You decide to take that as your cue to get out before things get too chilly, or the next wave of bathers arrives, complete with children who scream at volumes that make sheep scatter. You towel off with a piece of coarse linen that feels like sandpaper. Still, the sensation is welcome. It means you're clean. Or, cleaner. You pull your tunic back over your damp body and instantly regret it. It's cold, it clings, and it smells like the old you. But for a brief moment you felt almost new, reborn, if slightly itchy. On the way out, someone offers you a cup of warm ale. You sip it, steam rising from your head and from the cup, and lean against the bathhouse wall, savouring the rare luxury of warmth and cleanliness. This won't last long. Tomorrow you'll be back in the fields. Dirt will reclaim you like an old friend. But tonight, you are gloriously, unmistakably not disgusting. And that's enough. You wake up scratching your head again. It's not the straw mattress or your itchy wool cap this time. It's something smaller, meaner, and far more persistent. You know the feeling. That crawling tickle just under the scalp. The little pinprick bites that ruin an otherwise tolerable morning. Congratulations, your head is once again home to an ever-thriving colony of lice. You sit up and start the daily ritual of scratching and muttering. In the faint morning light, you spot a few tiny dark specks on your fingers. Yep, definitely lice. Again. Here's the thing, everybody has them. Lice aren't a personal hygiene failure, they're a medieval inevitability. No matter how often you soak in a bathhouse or rub vinegar on your scalp, those little beasts always come back. They're like seasonal taxes, but itchier. Your go-to tool is a bone lice comb, carefully carved, fine-toothed, and passed down like a family heirloom. You run it through your hair slowly, wincing as it tugs and pulls. The teeth catch on eggs and tangles alike. The nits are stuck to your strands like tiny grains of grief. You squint, flick the captured bugs into the fireplace, and hope they sizzle. Historians still argue whether lice were merely tolerated or actively battled on a regular basis. Some accounts suggest peasant families shared combs and picked nits off each other like affectionate primates. Others insist they just shaved their heads and gave up. You live somewhere in between, too vain to go bald, too itchy to ignore it. Under your tunic you can feel them crawling elsewhere. Not just lice, fleas too. Your underthings play host to a full medieval menagerie. You think about stripping and shaking everything out, but there's no privacy here. So you do a little dance, scratch, shimmy, shake, hoping it passes for a morning stretch. Sometimes you try home remedies. You crush lavender buds and rub them into your scalp, or sprinkle your sheets with rosemary and dried mint. None of it works for long, but it makes you smell a bit less like despair. Occasionally you smear pig fat and ashes onto your hair, then wrap it in a cloth overnight to suffocate the lice. It's mostly messy, mildly traumatic, and entirely futile. And yet, oddly, you're not embarrassed. No one is. Lice are just part of the package, like splinters or stubbed toes. You might even find yourself casually plucking a louse from your sleeve during dinner, flicking it away mid-bite. It's not rude, it's routine. You glance around at your family. Your younger brother's got scratch marks on his neck. Your aunt's rubbing her scalp with a comb that's seen better decades. Everyone's dealing with it. In fact, some noblewomen kept small animals, like ferrets or lapdogs, because they believed the fleas would rather hop onto the pet than their own skin. You don't have that luxury. Your only pet is a chicken named Mabel, and she's not interested in pest control. Fringe fact for you, it wasn't uncommon for people to roast their clothing over a fire to kill lice. You've done it yourself. You hang your tunic near the flames until it steams, hoping the heat will drive out the tiny invaders. But sometimes you overdo it, and that's how you ended up with that crispy hole in your sleeve last winter. A lesson in moderation, if ever there was one. But there's another solution, a drastic one. You reach for the shears and stare at your reflection in a polished piece of metal that generously pretends to be a mirror. Do you shave your head? Again? Shaving isn't unheard of, especially for kids or during hot summers. It's efficient. It gives the bugs nowhere to hide, but it also makes your ears look weird, and people will definitely stare. Still, the itchiness is getting to you. You compromise. You trim your hair down to stubble and rub in some crushed thyme. It tingles. You feel like you've done something, which in medieval life is basically winning. The lice won't go away forever. They'll be back next week, or tomorrow, or before you've even finished this sentence. But for now, you've reclaimed a small, itchy victory. And don't think romance is off the table because of lice. It's not. People fall in love while scratching their necks. Flirting happens between lice checks. Some sweethearts even help each other comb through the worst of it. If that's not commitment, what is? There's even a slightly disturbing medieval love poem that refers to a lady's hair as a golden net where no lice dare dwell. Poetic nonsense, really. If she had hair, she had lice. But you admire the effort. And speaking of that, If you're preparing for marriage or even just a big festival, you might go full grooming mode. Comb, trim, vinegar rinse. Maybe even borrow someone's linen head wrap to make yourself look more presentable. It won't stop the itching, but at least you'll look slightly less infested. You scratch your neck again and sigh. The day's just starting. There are animals to feed, fields to hoe, fires to tend. But for this one moment, you fought back against the crawling tide. Of course, your scalp is still buzzing faintly, like a low hum in the background of your day. That's just life. You've got friends, food, and half a bottle of ale waiting for you later. So you ignore the itch, straighten your shoulders, and go face the world. With bugs in your hair and dignity in your heart. You're sweating. Again. Not from dancing or anything fun, just from hauling firewood up a muddy hill while wearing 3 layers of wool. And you can feel it happening. That ripe underarm stew bubbling into existence. You stop to sniff yourself, mostly out of curiosity, and recoil like you just walked past a dead goat. Welcome to your natural medieval musk. But don't worry, you've got a secret weapon. You pull a small bottle from your satchel, a watery concoction of rosemary and vinegar. It smells sharp, herbal, a little like salad dressing. You dab some on your neck and under your arms using the corner of your sleeve. Instant improvement. Kind of. You still smell like a sweaty salad, but that's a major upgrade from what you smelled like 5 minutes ago. This is your version of deodorant. Medieval peasants didn't have little twist-up sticks or citrus body sprays. They had plants and vinegar, and a willingness to splash whatever was available onto whatever was offending their nostrils the most. You learned this recipe from your neighbour's aunt, who swears by it. Rosemary keeps the bad humours out, she said, while throwing a bucket of it over her goats. It's not entirely clear whether she was cleansing the goats or herself, but either way, the smell stuck around for hours. Historians still argue whether personal scent management was widespread among peasants or just a luxury of the well-off. Some records suggest herbal washes and infused waters were common, especially in southern Europe. Others think it was more localised, done mainly during festivals or when trying to impress a potential mate. You do it because you've got a social event later. Not a fancy one, just a gathering at the central fire pit. But someone might bring out a flute, someone else might dance, and you'd rather not smell like roasted onions dipped in anxiety. Your herbal splash isn't the only trick in the peasant self-care toolbox. People use crushed petals, dried lavender, marjoram, mint, even sage rolled into little pouches and tucked into tunics or tied at the wrist. You've tried a few, some help. Others just make it smell like you're hiding soup in your sleeves. There's also a thing called pomanders, little scent balls made from wax or cloth, filled with fragrant herbs. Nobles carry them to ward off miasma, those invisible, stinky spirits that supposedly carry disease. You don't have a pomander, but one time you stuffed a goose bladder with thyme and wore it around your neck. It didn't help the smell, but it kept people talking about you for weeks. Your favourite trick, though, is simply not moving too much. Because here's the truth. Movement equals sweat, and sweat equals doom. You've mastered the slow shuffle, the lean against a wall casual posture, anything to avoid setting off the armpit alarm. Still, it's summer and you're human. Sweat happens. Your tunic is damp in the usual places, and even though your rosemary vinegar mix is holding its own, you start to notice it fading. You'll need to reapply before the evening. Maybe find some crushed mint on the walk back and rub it into your collar. There's one thing you never try though, perfume. That's noble territory. Expensive, floral, and suspiciously French. Perfume is for people who think bathing in rosewater makes them holy. You're not one of them. And even if you could afford it, the church might raise an eyebrow. Fringe tidbit. In some places, monks actually warned against using perfume or excessive fragrance, claiming it tempted pride or invited lust. You once heard a sermon where the priest compared scented oils to the devil's breath. A bit much considering the priest himself smelled like damp books and regret. Still, you find your own balance. You don't want to smell like a meadow, just maybe not like a dying stable. You're not aiming for a lure, you're aiming for tolerable, and you're not alone. Everyone's got their system. One friend crushes garlic and claims it clears the pores, though it mostly clears the room. Another swears by rubbing goose fat behind her ears to trap the stink. She's single, but confident. If you're courting someone, the stakes are even higher. You might bathe that morning if there's time. You'll wear your cleanest tunic, scrub your fingernails with ash, and load up on the vinegar spritz. You'll stand slightly upwind. You'll talk just enough to seem interesting, but not enough to waft too much breath across the space between you. You start preparing in the late afternoon. A quick rinse at the well, just face, neck, maybe feet. Then the splash of rosemary vinegar. Then a brief moment of prayer. Please, let this be the day you smell just neutral enough to hold someone's attention. At the fire pit later, the air is thick with smoke, roasting meat, and the unmistakable smell of humans trying very hard. Everyone's doing their best. The music starts, someone claps, and the smell just becomes background noise. Someone laughs at your joke, someone else nudges your shoulder. You catch a whiff of your own collar. It's holding up. Barely. But just enough. So you survive another day. Not quite fresh, but not repulsive either. You carry your smell like a badge of effort. You work, you sweat, you live, and sometimes you even dance. You're standing knee-deep in mud, wrestling a reluctant pig back into its pen, when you spot her. Braids pinned up, skirt hiked just above the ankles, shoveling muck with the practiced grace of someone who doesn't flinch when it splashes. And just like that, it hits you. Despite the smells, the mess, and the very real possibility that she just stepped on a toad barefoot, she's beautiful. This is what courtship looks like when love blossoms beside a compost pile. Welcome to Romance in the Middle Ages, Barn Odor edition. You don't have flowers or chocolates, you have onions, straw, and the kind of charisma that comes from not actively smelling like mouldy cheese today. It's a low bar, but you clear it. You wipe your hands on your tunic, questionable choice, and shuffle over. Your approach isn't subtle. You pretend to be looking for something. Lose a shoe, you say, gesturing at your clearly bare feet. She glances at you, snorts, and keeps shoveling. You're off to a solid start. Medieval peasants didn't date, at least not in the swipe-right, candlelight way modern folks know. Love came from familiarity, shared chores, and the long, slow realization that someone else could tolerate you, and might even laugh at your jokes. Courtship was practical, gritty, and rooted in survival. You didn't fall in love across a ballroom. You fell in love over cabbages and cow dung. You spend days trying to talk to her. You help her carry water from the well, even though your back's still sore from yesterday's wood chopping. You offer her the better half of your bread, without too much weevil in it. She nods, occasionally smiles, and once even laughs when you trip over your own goat. Historians still argue whether peasant marriages were mostly arranged or genuinely chosen. In many villages, people pick their own spouses, though choices were limited. You'd likely marry someone from your village, maybe someone from the next one over if the roads were clear and your parents weren't overly protective. Romance happened not in secret gardens, but in fields, at markets, beside fires. And yes, people married without soap, without perfume, without ever having heard the word flirt. But it worked. You notice her habits, how she ties her hair with twine, how she hums while she plucks feathers from a hen. She notices you too, or at least stops pretending not to. She borrows your fire starter. You accidentally leave a turnip near her doorstep. That's peasant flirting. Small gestures, slightly spoiled produce. There's a kind of dignity in it. You both work hard. You both smell human. No one's trying to impress with pretense. Instead, you try not to pass gas too obviously during dinner. That's courtship restraint. And speaking of smells, here's a fringe tidbit. Some people believe that a person's body odour could reveal their temperament. A sweet scent meant a gentle soul. A sour one suggested bitterness or laziness. You're not sure who came up with this, but it makes you slightly more anxious about your armpits. When the village festival rolls around, you finally get your moment. It's spring, and the maypole's going up. Flowers are scarce, but someone stuck dandelions in every available crevice, and everyone's slightly tipsy on thin ale. You wash your face at the well, rub mint under your arms, and wear your least crispy tunic. The air is full of smoke, garlic, and nervous excitement. You ask her to dance. She says yes. You move in clumsy circles, trying not to step on her toes or fall into the fire pit. Your hands are sweaty, but not too sweaty. She smiles. You both smell like the inside of a root cellar, but you don't mind. Neither does she. Romance here isn't about roses or music, it's about timing. Who you laugh with, who hands you the water bucket when you're coughing your lungs out, who helps you dig out a stuck sheep without complaining. You might sneak behind the barn later and share a kiss. Brief, breathy, maybe slightly cabbage-flavoured. No judgment. This is how love works in your world. Raw, muddy, and surprisingly sincere. You talk with her while you work over the next few days. You share stories about your family, your hopes for your next harvest, your suspicions about why the miller's bread always tastes faintly of soap. She listens. She tells you she once caught 3 fish with her bare hands. You pretend to be impressed. You are. Eventually you ask her if she'd consider sharing more than firewood someday. She gives you a look, half suspicion, half smile, and says, "Ask me again after sheep shearing." That's practically a proposal. People in your village get married young, not always by choice, but often with hope. The idea isn't that marriage is a fairy tale, it's that it's a partnership. Someone to hoe the fields with, someone to help you boil lice out of your tunics, someone to smell you at your worst and not run away. So yes, you survive without soap, you survive with lice, with pig stink, with all the glorious, messy realities of medieval life. And still, you find someone who wants to stand beside you, even when you're covered in turnip peels and panic sweat. You sit cross-legged on a log bench, your tunic freshly beetled, your hands only slightly stained with onion juice, and your stomach growling like a church bell on Sunday morning. Tonight's a feast night, which means 3 exciting things: hot food, loud laughter, and the unspoken pressure of making a decent impression. Because let's face it, half the village is eyeing each other like sheep at the midsummer market, and the other half are just here for the lentils. Feasts don't happen every day. They're saved for big events, weddings, harvests, saints' days, or when someone miraculously finds a wheel of cheese behind a forgotten barrel. You've washed your face with well water, slicked back your hair with a dab of bacon grease. A questionable grooming decision, but hey, it adds shine. And even chewed on a fennel seed to pretend your breath didn't just crawl out of a garlic clove. You glance around the room, or more accurately the open-air gathering space next to the baker's shed. There's a long plank table, several stools, and a couple of makeshift benches fashioned from old wagon parts. The whole place smells of boiled cabbage, fire smoke, and something lightly burnt. It's intoxicating, or alarming, maybe both. You sit between 2 cousins, both shouting over each other with mouths full of barley cake. The moment you reach for a hunk of bread, someone slaps your hand and passes you a roasted turnip instead. Welcome to dinner etiquette, unpredictable, competitive, and entirely based on seniority. Now, feasting in the medieval world isn't just about eating, it's about seeing and being seen. This is where alliances are hinted at, rivalries flare up, and potential romances either blossom or dissolve under the weight of excessive flatulence. And make no mistake, everyone is farting. Loudly, proudly, unapologetically. You feel the rumble in your own belly, the early warning signal that your body's about to betray you in front of your latest crush. You tighten your core and try to focus on the turnip. It tastes like dirt with a hint of hope. You nod appreciatively, as if it's a delicacy. She's watching, after all. Historians still argue how refined peasant dining customs truly were. Some claim there were clear rules. No elbows on the table, chew with your mouth closed, always share with your neighbour. Others suggest the average feast was basically a slow-motion food fight with better lighting. You lean toward the second theory. After all, someone across the table just sneezed into a communal dish, and no one flinched. Fringe tidbit of the evening. In some regions, people believe that breaking wind at the table was actually healthy. Better out than in, they'd say, nodding sagely as the dog under the table passed out. Still, you do your best. You chew quietly. You laugh at jokes. You pass the ale when asked and only spill it once. Someone starts playing a lute, badly, and everyone claps anyway. The mood lifts like steam from a stew pot. Conversation flows. There's talk of harvest predictions, strange lights seen in the woods, and how the miller's wife might be a witch, though mostly just because her bread is always perfectly risen. The person next to you starts debating whether chickens have souls. You nod thoughtfully, unsure if you're supposed to contribute or just listen and chew. You catch her eye, yes, her again, from across the table. She's laughing at something, not you, yet, but she sees you. You quickly wipe your chin with your sleeve, which already has dried porridge on it. Too late. But you smile anyway, and it turns out first impressions aren't about being clean. They're about being kind, quick with a joke, generous with your bread, and not hoarding the last pickled beet. You manage all four. You might have even blushed when she handed you a cup of ale. Either that or the cabbage is backfiring. Then someone starts a song. A loud, slightly off-key ballad about a cow named Matilda who ran off with a tanner. You join in, off-key but enthusiastic. You clap, stomp, and for a brief, shining moment, forget that you haven't bathed in 3 weeks. You're part of the noise, the warmth, the strange magic of a meal shared under stars and torchlight. There's no cutlery, by the way, just hands and knives if you brought your own. You keep yours sharp and close. Not for defence, just to look responsible. Sharing a knife is practically intimate, and she lets you slice her apple without flinching. That's progress. Later, when most people are groaning and lying flat on the grass with their belts loosened, you stay sitting up, alert, trying not to let the roasted leeks make a dramatic return. She joins you, sits nearby, offers you the last piece of oatcake. You accept, and in that brief moment your greasy fingers touch. You both freeze, then laugh. No sparks fly, just crumbs, but that's enough. Because tonight, at this feast in this tunic that still smells faintly of lye and livestock, you've managed something rare. You've made a connection. Despite the smells, the sweat, the questionable digestive noises, someone saw you and didn't look away. And isn't that the point of a feast? Not just to eat, but to be fed, by company, by laughter, by the delicious realization that someone might be able to stand you, gas and all. It's your wedding day. You wake up to the smell of stew and wet hay because of course you do. Romance in the 14th century isn't about scented candles or harp music. It's about timing, family negotiations, and making sure no one's too hungover from last night's feast to show up. Your tunic is mostly clean. It was rinsed 2 days ago, dried over the hearth, and rubbed with a crushed herb mix that kind of smells like mint and kind of smells like last summer's mouldy bread. But it'll do. You've picked the twigs out of your hair, wiped your face with well water, and even found a pair of wool socks without holes. You're peasant-level radiant. And she? She's braided her hair with ribbons scavenged from an old cloth, rubbed her cheeks with beetroot juice for a blush, and somehow made her best shift look like it belongs in a royal tapestry. You both look presentable. You both smell not terrible. In this world, that's peak wedding glamour. Weddings for peasants are less about glamour and more about ritual, survival, and getting the local priest to sign off before sundown. But they still carry weight. People show up, sometimes even bathe beforehand, and the atmosphere buzzes with excitement, judgment, and possibly bees. The ceremony happens outside the church doors, not inside, because you're peasants, and inside is for the upper crust or spiritual emergencies. You stand together, hands awkwardly clasped, while the priest mumbles prayers and glares at the boy poking a chicken in the front row. You say your vows, or rather, repeat them, something about until death, which honestly could happen any winter now. You exchange tokens, not rings. Maybe a belt, a dagger, or a piece of string that doesn't smell too strongly of sheep. Historians still argue how formal these ceremonies really were. Some say hand fasting, a ritual where you tie your hands together and declare your intent, is all that was needed. Others insist a priest's blessing was vital. In your village, you're lucky to have both. A string-tied hand fasting followed by a priest who may or may not be sober. And now you're married, just like that. Cue the celebration. The feast isn't extravagant, but there's food. Flatbread, dried apples, roasted roots, maybe a chicken if someone was generous. The ale flows freely, and so does the noise. Children run between adults like greased pigs. Someone plays a reed flute. Your uncle starts dancing on a barrel, falls off, and yells that it was intentional. You're both slightly dazed, slightly tipsy, and completely surrounded by people who love you. Sometimes loudly, sometimes judgmentally, but love nonetheless. There are no flowers, no speeches, no choreographed first dance, but someone does throw old bread crusts at you for luck. One hits your eye, you laugh. The bedding ceremony, depending on your village's traditions, may or may not be public. In some places, the community walks the couple to their new shared straw mattress and throws grain over them for fertility. In your village, they bang pots outside your door, then scatter before things get awkward. You sit beside her on the bed, brushing stray straw out of your hair and hers. You're both nervous, you've both eaten too many onions, and yet, you're in this together. You survive the chores, the lice, the feast, and your cousin nearly setting his beard on fire. You'll survive this too. Here's a weird tidbit for you. Some medieval folks believed that having unwashed feet on your wedding night could doom the marriage, so you each take a moment to wipe your feet with a damp cloth. It's more ceremonial than effective, but hey, it counts. And here's another truth. Despite all the smells, the scratchy linens, and the lingering cabbage scent in the air, there's something oddly tender about it all. You don't need silk sheets or perfume. You just need each other, a warm hearth, and the shared understanding that life is hard, but not as hard when you've got someone to snore beside. No one expects you to look like nobility. No one expects you to smell like roses. They just expect you to love each other as best you can between harvests, storms, and the occasional flea invasion. You drift off that night beside her, both of you wrapped in a patchwork wool, with a cat curled at your feet and distant laughter echoing outside. It's not a fairy tale. It's not a dream. It's better. It's real. And tomorrow you'll wake up, throw on your tunics, boil more porridge, and return to life as two peasants who picked each other. Dirty feet, sweaty armpits, and all. You're hauling buckets of slop to the pigs when it suddenly hits you again. That ripe, musky you. You stop mid-step and sniff your underarm. It's impressive. Not good, not bad, just powerful, like a warning sign or a personal brand. Here's the truth. Nobody in your world is fussed about armpits. They're just there. They sweat. They stink. That's life. In fact, you can go an entire week, sometimes longer, without even thinking about them unless something's dripping down your side while you're threshing grain. Modern folks obsess over deodorant. Medieval peasants, not so much. The science of smell isn't a science yet. The idea that clean means pleasantly neutral scented hasn't been invented. Instead, body odour is considered normal, expected, and in a strange way, even informative. You know what people smell like after a long day's work. You can tell if someone's been baking bread, harvesting flax, mucking out stalls, or spending too much time near the tanner's shed. The scents are distinct, layered, and deeply personal, and no one judges. Because if they do, they're probably a monk or from the next village. Historians still argue whether peasants even noticed body odour as a separate thing. Some claim that communal living and shared chores meant smells were so constant, they faded into the background. Others suggest that people did notice, especially during feasts, festivals, or courtship, and made small efforts to mask them with herbs, smoke, or sheer optimism. You've got one trick, Smoke bathing. That's right. You sometimes stand near a smoky fire and let the scent of smouldering juniper or sage soak into your skin. It doesn't make you smell better. It just makes you smell like firewood, which is, an improvement. And speaking of improvement, you've seen what the rich do. The Lord's daughter sometimes walks by the village path, dabbing her wrists with rose water and wearing perfumed sleeves. It smells nice, sure, but also wrong. Like a flower trying to grow in a compost heap. It's so out of place it practically squeaks. Plus you're not trying to smell unnatural. You want to smell human, functional, busy. If someone catches a whiff of you, it should say, "I've been hauling grain since sunrise," not, "I fell in a perfume barrel by accident." That's the difference. For you, scent is survival, not seduction. Now here's a slightly weird one. In religious circles, particularly among saints and the very devout, not smelling was a sign of holiness. There were stories of people who never washed yet supposedly smelled like roses. They were said to have the odour of sanctity. You're not expecting divine fragrance anytime soon. You'll settle for not smelling like a dead badger. Fringe tidbit. Some monasteries actually documented which saints had pleasant corpses. Yep, after death. If your body didn't stink when it decayed, it meant you were extra holy. Meanwhile, back in your world, a non-stinky person while alive just meant they probably rolled in mint. Of course, some parts of you get more attention than others. Hands, for instance. You wash those before meals. Kind of. Maybe. Feet get the occasional rinse, especially if someone spots a suspicious rash. But armpits, they're hidden. Tucked away. No one's sniffing you there unless you're mid-wrestle or being tackled by a goat. And guess what? Your future spouse doesn't care. They've got their own underarm saga going on. If anything, it's comforting. You both have strong scent signatures, and somehow they start to feel familiar, like home. You know it's her walking behind you just by the mix of herbs and smoke she carries. She probably recognises your sweaty shoulder funk before she sees your face. You still do what you can. You rinse in the stream. You pat yourself dry with straw if it's available. You rub crushed rosemary under your arms when the mood strikes, or if there's an important gathering. But you don't overdo it. That would be suspicious. People might think you're hiding something, like a rash, or a guilty conscience. And if someone does complain about your odour, you can always point out that St. Jerome supposedly wore the same tunic for 20 years. He's a saint. You're just following the example. Purely spiritual. Let's also not forget the environmental factors. Your cottage isn't exactly ventilated. You sleep next to a fire, with 6 other people and 2 chickens. Everyone smells like stew and damp wool. Your nose adapts. Fast. And yet, you're still human. You still crave affection. You still hope someone will lean close and not flinch. So you keep your armpits in check, as best you can. Not polished, not perfumed, just under control. Most days. You scratch idly as you walk down the path toward the village green. Someone nods in greeting. No one gags. Success. Later at the fire pit, you lift your arm to toss another stick on the flames. A faint whiff of rosemary and dried sweat drifts up. Not bad. You catch her eye. She doesn't turn away. She even smiles. In that moment, you realise something deep and slightly ridiculous. In a world without deodorant, connection doesn't come from covering your scent. It comes from someone liking you anyway. You wake up on a straw mattress that smells faintly of mildew, sheep and you. Morning light filters in through the cracks in your cottage wall, and you stretch, bones popping, back stiff from another night of sleeping like a bundled sack of root vegetables. You haven't washed in a while. You don't even count anymore. You just know that you've reached that distinct stage of dirt where your skin feels more like bark than flesh. And yet, you're not alone. Because out in the wider world there's a whisper among the devout, a belief that the dirtier you are, the holier you might be. Yes, you heard that right. There's a trend, especially among monks, hermits and extra pious types, who see cleanliness not as next to godliness, but suspiciously close to vanity. Some saints go their entire lives without bathing. Others wear the same robe until it rots off their body. And still, somehow, they're revered. You skip a bath for 3 weeks, and your cousin calls you Swampfoot for a month. You pull on your tunic, hardened in some places from repeated exposure to sweat, smoke, and possibly soup, and head outside. It's church day. You cross paths with old Edgar, who hasn't bathed since the last eclipse and proudly claims it's made him closer to St. Cuthbert. He smells like fermented barley and spiritual pride. Historians still argue whether Saint's legendary filthiness was fact, exaggeration, or symbolic. But plenty of written accounts praise their refusal to wash as a form of divine humility. St. Thomas Becket reportedly wore a lice-filled shirt as penance. St. Agnes allegedly refused any contact with water at all. You wonder if maybe they just really, really hated winter baths. This ideology bleeds into village life too. Some folk believe that avoiding personal grooming is a sign of spiritual seriousness. If you smell like fresh herbs, they raise an eyebrow. If you smell like penance, they nod respectfully. Fringe tidbit. There's a rumour, passed around at alehouses and hearths, that one saint's corpse smelled like flowers after death, despite never having bathed in life. The villagers assume divine intervention. You assume an enthusiastic herbalist passed by at the right moment. Still, it makes you pause. Is your grime a spiritual badge of honour, or just a tragic inevitability of field labour and zero soap? You arrive at the small church and the smell hits before you even reach the door. Everyone's crammed in, tunic to tunic, shoulder to shoulder. Some haven't washed in months, and it's like a symphony of armpits, old cheese, incense and hope. The priest begins his sermon. He's got a sheen of oil on his forehead, hair that hasn't seen water since Easter, and the voice of someone who believes that bathing might tempt the devil. He talks about suffering, sacrifice, and the dangers of bodily pleasure, which apparently includes warm water and soap. You cough discreetly into your sleeve, mostly to avoid inhaling the mixture of sweat and piety hanging in the air. After church, you overhear a group of elders discussing the vanity of a young woman who was seen washing her feet with river water, trying to tempt the blacksmith's son, one of them mutters. Never mind that she probably just had mud between her toes and was sick of slipping on her own calluses. It's all relative. If you're a peasant, washing might be practical, or it might look like you think you're better than everyone else. Cleanliness could mean pride. Pride could mean sin. So, most people stick to a solid middle ground. Occasionally clean hands, half-clean tunic, suspiciously crusty everything else. You do what you can. You wash your face on feast days. You scrub your hands before communion. You don't parade around with rosemary oil unless you want people to think you're either rich or possessed. And yet, there's a quiet rebellion stirring in some corners. A few younger folks, bold, possibly doomed, start to wash more often. They experiment with boiled herbs, soap made from ash and fat, even tooth-scraping twigs. You admire them from afar. You join them, but your uncle would probably start preaching about the dangers of over-cleansing the soul. Still, you catch yourself wondering, what if being clean isn't sinful? What if it just feels good? You file the thought away and return to reality, where your feet have developed a permanent mud outline, and your underthings haven't seen daylight in a fortnight. You head back home. Along the way you pass a hermit's shack. The man inside hasn't spoken in years. Rumour has it he lives on moss and prayer. You pause outside. The smell seeps through the wood. It's potent. You can't decide if you're in awe or about to pass out. Back at your cottage, you sit by the fire and pick flakes of old lye soap out of a cracked bowl. You think about using it. You think about St. Guthlac, who lived in a swamp and never washed, and still made it into the holy books. Then you sigh, dip a rag into a pot of warm water and scrub your face. Just your face. Nothing too prideful. Because maybe you're not trying to be a saint. Maybe you're just trying to smell slightly less like a soggy boot. And that's okay too. You're sitting by the fire, gnawing on a cold heel of bread and listening to the rhythmic sound of your spouse snoring on the straw mattress behind you. It's not a gentle snore. It's more like the wheezing sigh of a bellows mixed with a stubborn pig refusing to leave the mud. Still, it's oddly comforting. You've learned to love that sound. Somehow, amid all the mess and muck, this has become home. Because yes, it turns out love can survive filth. Marriage, for a medieval peasant, isn't built on romantic strolls or dreamy conversations by moonlight. It's built on shared chores, whispered jokes during long days of threshing, and the unspoken agreement that yes, we're both equally smelly and that's fine. You wake each morning tangled in rough blankets, sometimes stuck to each other with dried sweat and heat. You stretch, scratch, yawn, and take turns checking each other for lice. It's not exactly glamorous, but it is intimate. Nothing says commitment like helping your beloved scrape parasites out of their hair before breakfast. Sometimes you argue about spilled grain, burnt porridge, whose turn it is to empty the chamber pot. But it's hard to hold a grudge when you're both ankle-deep in pig slop by mid-morning. Resentment doesn't last long in a life where the next task is always around the corner, and usually filthy. Historians still argue just how affectionate peasant marriages really were. Some evidence suggests love-based unions were more common than we once thought. Others insist most matches were practical, driven by family ties, land, or livestock arrangements. But stories and folk songs hint at real tenderness, a kind of scrappy dirt under the fingernails devotion that isn't less meaningful just because it's loud and smells like boiled cabbage. You glance over at your spouse as they roll over, one foot slipping out from under the blanket. That foot has never seen a pedicure. It has, however, kicked open a stubborn sheep gate and once crushed a rat in the pantry. It's a heroic foot. You love it. And you've settled into rhythms together. Morning routines involve taking turns with the fire, cooking porridge thick enough to stand a spoon upright, and arguing gently about whether to add the last onion to today's stew or save it for tomorrow's. Evenings are spent shoulder to shoulder at the hearth, sharing one stool if it's cold, sometimes talking, sometimes not. Just being near each other is enough. You pass a comb back and forth. Sometimes you hum the same tune. Other times you quietly judge the neighbours together. And yes, bodily functions are a shared adventure. You both fart like champions. The cottage is small. There's no escaping the sounds or the smells. At some point you just start rating each other. Solid 7, you say. More bass than last time. They grin, not even pausing their stitching. You sleep tangled like a pair of cats in a basket, limbs everywhere, blankets askew, dreams interrupted by the sound of someone coughing next door, or a chicken deciding 3 a.m. is morning now. Fringe tidbit. In some regions, couples used to bless their shared bed with salt, herbs, or symbolic objects, garlic braids, dried flowers, or even carved wooden figures meant to ensure harmony. You've got an old spoon wedged in the headboard crack. It's not symbolic. It just keeps the draft out. But still, the bed hasn't collapsed yet, so maybe the spoon's doing something magical. Despite the grime, the hard work, and the daily battle with crusty socks and eternally smoky hair, you've created something precious. A partnership that thrives in imperfection. You hold hands when no one's looking, share your last bite of bread without speaking, and lean against each other when the cold creeps in through the doorframe. Even during the worst of times, when the rain leaks through the roof and your feet are wet all night, when the stew burns, or when your spouse contracts something ominous and starts sneezing like a plague bell, you're there. You worry. You stew herbs. You make soup and pray, not for cleanliness, just for survival. One evening, after a particularly muddy day, you both collapse into the cottage, soaked to the knees, covered in slop. You strip off your outer layers and sit in silence. After a while, your spouse mutters, "We smell like a cow's backside." You nod. A cow's backside that's been left in the sun. Then you both laugh until your ribs hurt. That's love. Not the spotless, perfume-soaked kind, but the kind that finds warmth in shared filth, humour in hardship, and comfort in the familiarity of each other's utterly human selves. You've seen noble couples pass through the village, dressed in velvet and riding horses that probably smell better than your entire cottage. But they always seem stiff, too busy trying to stay clean to laugh. You wouldn't trade places, because your love is real, messy, loud, occasionally smelly, but real. The kind of love that survives not in spite of the muck, but because of it. You're crouched by a cracked mirror. Well, not so much a mirror as a shiny piece of metal hammered flat enough to reflect something resembling your face. And dabbing at your cheeks with crushed petals. Red ones, maybe rose, maybe poppy, maybe just something someone dropped on the path that smelled floral enough. It doesn't matter, the goal is simple. Look a little more alive than you feel. Welcome to the medieval peasant makeup routine, if you can even call it that. There's no vanity table, no shimmering palette of colour, no brushes shaped like unicorn tails. Just you, a smear of nature, and hope. Today's a market day, or maybe a saint's feast, or maybe you just feel like not looking quite so much like a walking compost pile. You've got a soft spot for a certain shade of dusty pink, which comes from soaking petals in ale for a few hours, then rubbing the pulpy mess directly onto your cheeks. It lasts until the next sneeze or drizzle. There's no mascara, of course, but you might use a burnt stick, charcoal from last night's fire, to lightly darken your lashes or line your eyes. Lightly is key. Overdo it, and you look like a soot-smeared ghost, which has not historically helped anyone find love or forgiveness or lower taxes. Historians still argue whether peasants routinely used makeup, or if it was mostly reserved for nobles and scandalous brothel workers. Some claim village girls use simple methods, berry juice, crushed minerals, chalk powder, to boost their appeal. Others believe most folks were too busy surviving to bother, but you've seen plenty of field workers sneak dabs of beetroot onto their lips before festival season, so someone's fibbing. And then there's the pale skin trend. Nobility love it. Pale means you don't labour outside like a regular peasant. It means you stay indoors, count coins, and write letters about taxes. So of course, some ambitious villagers try to copy it. You've seen folks pat flour onto their faces for that dusty ghost chic look. You tried it once. It made you sneeze for an hour and gave you the complexion of a terrified baker. You've since stuck to sun-kissed dirt brown, more authentic, easier to maintain. Still, there's a charm in trying. Your neighbour Greta makes a lemon balm salve that smells suspiciously like sheep cheese, but leaves your skin feeling less like old bark. Someone else swears by smearing goose grease under the eyes for youthful shine. Honestly, it just attracts flies. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval women use lead-based powders to whiten their faces. Yes, lead. They didn't know it was poisonous. They just knew it worked. You, on the other hand, have stuck to flour and chalk. Safer. Though once you got caught in the rain and ended up looking like a half-melted loaf of bread. You sometimes wonder why you bother. You're not courting anyone new. You're not trying to charm a merchant into dropping his carrot prices. But maybe it's just about feeling human. When your world is full of mud, sweat and smells that could knock over a donkey, there's something gently defiant about rubbing colour onto your face and saying, I still matter. Of course, you do your best not to go overboard. Too much colour and people start whispering. Trying to look like a town girl, they'll say with a sniff. Who's she trying to impress? Your answer, myself. But you don't say it out loud. You just nod, smile, and smear another layer of berry tint on your lips. Your spouse notices. Not right away, but eventually. They squint, grin, and say something devastatingly romantic like, your face looks less sad today. You take it as a compliment. In fact, you write it in the dirt wall of the cottage so you don't forget. Makeup isn't the only trick. You've got hair to wrangle too. You've boiled nettles into rinse water for shine. Painful to gather, oddly effective. You've braided it tightly to hide the frizz, wrapped it in linen to cover the worst bits, even burned the ends off once because you thought it would help. It didn't. But your hairline still tells the tale. There's no shampoo, of course. You rub ashes into your scalp, or clay, or sometimes nothing. Just a long combing session with that same old bone comb that's been in the family since someone accidentally invented it by sitting on a rib. Your hair smells like smoke, earth, and faintly of yesterday's stew, but that's the peasant perfume. It's comforting. And as for your eyebrows, well, you leave them alone. Too much fuss and people assume you've lost your mind, or joined a travelling troupe, or have plans to seduce the bishop. You finish dabbing your cheeks, bite your lips for a little colour, and pat down your hair with wet fingers. In the warped reflection of the metal you look alive. You smile. A little crooked, a little cracked lip, but sincere. You walk outside and the wind immediately undoes half your efforts. A passing goat sneezes on your skirt. A child throws a beat and hits your shoulder. Still, you hold your head high. Because even here, even now, in a world without mirrors, eyeliner or hairdryers, you found a way to carve out a moment of pride. A way to say, I'm still here. I still shine. Under the dirt, between the chores, and through all the smells, there's still you. And if someone doesn't like it, well, they're probably just jealous of your chalk blush contour. You wake up before the rooster. Not because you're eager, because the rooster is sleeping on your leg and you can't feel your toes. You groan, stretch, and sit up into another day of smoke, soot, sweat, and scratchy wool underpants. You're stiff, tired, and vaguely crusty. But even as you rub your eyes and swat away a flea, you feel something else too. Contentment. Because despite everything, you made it. You survived. The filth, the fleas, the famine that nearly wiped out your winter stores. You survived with a laugh in your throat, dirt under your nails, and someone beside you who snores like a mill wheel, but never forgets to save the warm spot by the fire for you. Life without soap. You've learned to manage. More than manage, you've learned to thrive. Sure, you never smelled like roses. You never scrubbed yourself pink with foaming gels or relaxed in lavender bubble baths. But you learned to clean with lye and vinegar, to comb out lice with a bone tool older than the thatched roof, to scrape sweat with a blunt knife and call it grooming. And no one batted an eye, because here, survival is the standard, and if you can make it through a harvest without losing your only tunic to mould, or your eyebrows to a rogue cooking flame, you're already winning. Historians still argue whether peasants were miserable or surprisingly happy. Some records, written by people who never worked a day in the fields, paint your life as nothing but hunger and filth. But then there are the songs, the ones sung by your neighbours while they pull turnips and beat laundry, the jokes shared in freezing rain, the way people still dance barefoot in the muck during festivals. There's joy here, it just smells different. You look around your cottage. A breeze flaps the patched linen curtain. The hearth is crackling. The floor is swept mostly. Your spouse is folding the one blanket you both didn't drool on overnight. The neighbour's kid is outside pretending to sword fight with a stick and yelling something about goblins stealing cabbages. And that's the thing, they're all still here. Dirty, noisy, alive. Still laughing, still teasing, still managing to fall in love even when everyone smells like goats and smoked onions. You pick up a wooden spoon to stir the morning pottage, now more ash than oats. You add more water, you hum, life rolls on. You remember when you were younger, hoping that one day you'd be important. Noble, maybe, or a travelling bard, or a merchant with soft hands and 2 tunics. And now, here you are. A peasant with dirt in your socks and a cow named after your childhood crush. And somehow, it's enough. You've learned to read the seasons by the dirt under your nails. You can tell how the air smells just before it rains, or when your pig is about to give birth. You've learned which herbs help a rash, and which make your tunic smell less like despair. You've seen weddings happen in muddy fields, babies born in smoky cottages, and laughter echo through the filth like a hymn. You've watched your neighbours get older, funnier, stinkier, and still dance like the world isn't full of fleas and famine. You've shared meals with people who didn't have enough and gave anyway. And even in all that muck, someone picked you. You still remember the first time they laughed at your joke about onions and witch curses. The first time they held your lice comb without flinching. The first time they rolled over in the dark, pressed their soot-streaked forehead to yours and whispered, "You smell worse than I do." And you knew it was love. So no, cleanliness wasn't everything. You didn't need perfume to be beautiful. You didn't need soap to be worthy. You needed grit and kindness and a little vinegar. And somehow, against all odds, you got married. You survived the rot, the rashes, the romance, the raw onions, and you still come home each night to someone who accepts your filth and farts as part of the package. That's not gross, that's miraculous. So now, as the fire fades low and the rooster finally wakes up, let your body sink into the quiet hush of the cottage. The air is soft, the straw is warm beneath you, and the world outside is hushed to a nighttime murmur. You've walked the muddy path of a medieval peasant. You've carried water with sore arms, scrubbed your tunic with lion prayers, and found ways to smile through the soot. You've scratched your scalp under a wool cap, traded stories around a smoky hearth, and fallen in love with someone who knew exactly how bad your feet could smell, and held them anyway. You've proven something simple and powerful, that even without luxuries, even without soap, softness can survive. Love can grow between the turnips and the laundry piles. Kindness can bloom in the places no one bothers to clean. Let that truth settle into your chest like a warm bowl of stew after a long day. Let the rhythm of your breath mimic the steady, honest life of those who came before you, who made do, who laughed loudly, who danced barefoot and didn't mind the mess. Let go of perfection. Let go of the need to be pristine. There's beauty in being a little broken, a little smelly, a little human. Now close your eyes. The fire's almost out. The night is soft. You've done enough. Sleep well, sweet peasant.